Hey guys, Chris from Nabionics. Just wanted to do another video and had some new things to share on the Storm, the X-Pro Storm 150. I did have a CDI go on the bike where it was running fine. I parked it as it was idling, walked into the maintenance building, walked out, and the bike was off. It wouldn't start back up. I got back to the shop, no spark, or at least such a weak spark that it was only viewable if the lights were off and it was total darkness. It was so ridiculously low. I had an extra coil, an ignition coil off of the KDX, and I tried it, and it was just as weak. So I knew it was a problem with the CDI. Well, the CDI or the Stata. Now, I want to mention too that I'll be carrying a lot of the parts for these bikes, including the CDI. This one uses a 5-pin CDI. So I'm going to try to get that stuff going. I've also acquired a resale dealer certificate from D&M Suspension, so I should be able to get the suspension components to improve these bikes. Not just this one, of course, but all of them really. D&M makes some pretty good stuff and is pretty reasonably priced, but without having a access directly to the equipment wholesale, I wouldn't be able to test a lot of stuff. And I would also probably need some information on the other model bikes in order to improve them, because obviously any kind of fitment issues or eye-to-eye length of the shock, all that's going to matter, and the only way to know that is to get first-hand information on the bikes themselves. Obviously with the Storm, I have it in front of me, so that's easy, but on the other bikes, it's going to be more difficult. In this video, I just wanted to show you the modifications made to a D&M shock that I had used on this bike and been testing. And it's probably 60% better than it was before. The dampening is still a little slow, and the only way I can modify that is either have D&M modify the shock itself or take apart the shock and see what I can do to change the valve stack in the shock. Right now I'm going to get this bike up to pull the shock out to show you. And once I take it out, you'll see what I'm talking about, the difference between this shock and the factory one. And I do want to make a couple of points that I think is important, because I don't want people to think that this is, the saving grace to a beginner's bike, because I have to tell you, it does have limitations. And I get a lot of people that say, well, I'm just a beginner, I am new to this, and because I'm new, I don't really need anything special. Well, I agree with some of that. But I'm also an IT professional, and I get a lot of people who say that about computers. Well, I'm just going to use it to go online, so I don't really need anything special. I can have an older computer. Well, the problem with having, in the case of the computers, having an older computer, you actually suffer consequences of having an older technology, and you're suffering from something that you wouldn't suffer from had you had just the real thing or the real current model. It kind of goes that way for this bike too. If you're a beginner and you're just buying it for dual sport use, mostly on road, you could definitely get away with it. I will tell you though, if you use it in stock form on the road, it'll feel fine until the one time that you hit a big bump, a pothole, and you will not believe how violent it is with the suspension set up from the factory, the way it's set up. Even after things have been changed on this bike, as better as it is, it's still brutal in New England single track trail systems with embedded rocks, roots, and logs. Brutal. It's way better than it was before. But I've been riding off-road in New England since I was 10 years old. And I can tell you without a doubt, if a beginner rides this bike and expects to gain confidence in an environment like single-track New England woods, you are going to be sorely mistaken and you are going to pay a price for it. Earlier today, I took it in the woods and I was kind of pushing the bike pretty hard. Wow, brutal. Like, it's so hard because of the way the dampening is set up and the geometry of the bike. It's just like on pump, like you wouldn't believe, and like you just don't have, it just doesn't track as good as many other bikes would. And part of it's the geometry, a huge part of it is the suspension. I'm lightweight, 140-ish pounds, 145 tops, and even with this sag properly set to me on the spring rate and the preload, it's still brutal. So it really does depend. And the reason why I'm saying this is because if you as a beginner buys this bike, if you do ride it in an environment like that, I promise you, you will not gain confidence on this bike. You can only go so far on it before you probably will get discouraged because it's just beating the hell out of you, you know? And even with the suspension modifications that I put into this bike, it's better, but it is by no means confidence inspiring. And this is like, I'm talking from a lot of experience riding off-road in race conditions, and this is a handful, even with the modifications to the suspension being a lot better. So I just wanted to tell people that if you're going in and you're buying this bike as a beginner, yes, you can ride it off-road like the stuff that Mike Festiva was doing in Washington on double track, relatively level terrain. I'm not talking about hills, I'm talking about embedded rocks and roots. That's where it really shows its true colors. And normally there's a lot of finesse with that kind of riding. Normally I would tweak the throttle, zip the wheel over the top of it on a full-size bike, no problem. I wouldn't even feel this stuff. This one, it just doesn't have the power or the torque to do that. It seems like a very torquey bike, but when it comes right down to it, it takes your weight to be much further back, and it takes you to be in first. First gear really is the only gear that you can really get the wheel up when you're trying to finesse it over things, and it still is a handful. So I just want to make it clear that as a beginner, this bike, it's good for certain things, but if you push it harder and you try to do things on it like true off-roading, I think you're going to probably be disappointed, because it is just really difficult to do that kind of stuff. It doesn't track very well. It's way better than it was, but I'm sure that most of you that are riding this bike are riding it probably as a beginner with the stock suspension, and the valving on the stock shock is way off. Way too slow. The rebound is brutally slow, and the fork is pretty slow too. The modifications I've done, and I mentioned this before, and if you go back in the catalog of videos on this bike, you'll see it. I did change the oil in the fork to automatic transmission fluid, which did help quite a bit. However, it did not solve the problem 100%, and the shock is a new shock by D&M. Let me see if I can get you guys a little bit closer to this. So the shock is a D&M, and it is it does a much better job than it did before, but it is by no means solves the problem 100%. I really do think that, I didn't analyze it yet, but I really do think that there's something to be said about getting the valving correct on the front and rear end as far as suspension goes, because I can tell that that's a big portion of the reason why it feels the way that it does. It's because it's just not valved correctly. Now, in combination of that, another thing that makes it relatively difficult off-road in New England woods anyway, not necessarily double track like I was saying that Mike Festiva was doing in Washington, that is easily doable. We got plenty of that stuff over here too. But most of the races and things, most of the stuff, the kind of riding that I'm used to is New England single track stuff. And it's brutal. There's a lot of embedded rocks, a lot of logs, and it's very difficult with this bike to do that. And I just wanted to make it clear that since this bike it's mostly purchased by beginners, I just wanted to make the beginners aware that this bike is not going to do you any favors, especially in stock form, when it comes to true off-road, single-track, New England style woods. It's going to beat the hell out of you. And that's not normal. I've ridden plenty of bikes, and I've raced bikes too, and it's just not, that's not the norm. So I just want to point it out that, that it does work pretty well for most stuff, I suppose, but it's not really a confidence booster. Okay, so I'm going to show you this in a sec here. So the stock shock, this is the stock shock, 1,000-pound spring rate spring. This particular one is the preload rings are turned down because I did have somebody over here on Sunday that was learning how to ride, and he's a much bigger guy than I am, about 210 pounds, 6'2". This bike is way too small for him, but the having the shock this stiff did work. But when I sat on it, it was brutal. It was like riding a bike with no suspension at all. Now, the D&M shock here, which is an MKAR series, this one had a 1,000-pound spring, but as you can see, if you look closely, you can see that the edge of the spring is squared off. You notice the difference between the roundness of the coil of the stock shock versus the square edge of the aftermarket one. That's because I put these springs on a wet wheel and I ground them. And then after I ground it for a while, I took it off, put it back on the bike, and I did the measurements on the race sag and the rider sag, or the static sag and the rider sag. And once I achieved the proper sag, which is approximately 100 millimeters for rider sag and about 35 to 45 millimeters of free sag, that's how you know that the spring is correct for your weight. I just kept going until I was able to achieve those measurements. And now the bike does what it's supposed to do. When I put the bike on the stand, and I tip it, I should say, when I have the bike on the stand and I tip it straight back up, you know, under its own weight, it should be sagging between 30 and 45 millimeters. The factory spring would never do that. So when all these calculations are done right, you can get the bike to perform the way a normal bike would perform, unless the conditions of bumps is extreme, like I said, New England woods. The other major advantage of this particular shock is it has adjustable rebound, which the other shock has no adjustments. Preload is not considered an adjustment. That's basically a set and forget setting to set the free sag for your weight. But I want to make it very clear, guys, that setting, like moving these rings and randomly putting them in a place so you get more or less pressure on the spring is not really the way it's designed to work. The preload is designed, like I said, to customize the spring rate as long as it's not too far off. There's a bit of a range on what springs can handle. Generally it's about 20-25 pounds. That's the range once you get in it, in that specific area for your weight. If you can't achieve the proper free sag of 30 to 45 millimeters or 35 to 45 millimeters, and also have 100 millimeters of sag when you're sitting on the bike in gear, then the spring is not right for your weight. That's the bottom line. And the bike does change personalities once you get the sag proper. This bike seems to like about 105 millimeters of sag, a little over 4 inches. And that's when I'm sitting on the bike. It's the distance between the fixed point on the fender with a fixed point on the axle or the swing arm. And it's the measurement between the bike being fully unloaded with the tire off the ground versus when you're sitting on it. That's the difference in, that's the sag measurement. A bike should never have no free sag, meaning when you take it off the stand, the bike should sag under its own weight, like I said, 35 to 45 millimeters. That's typical. I haven't did all the homework yet on this bike to see exactly if that's the optimum setting for this particular bike, but I will be testing it further. I'm going to put this back on the bike. The preload and everything is already pre-set up for me, for my weight, with the proper free sag and static sag and rider sag. So I'm going to show you when you put this back on the bike, when it's set up properly, the bike should sag under its own weight. So let's do that now. Also, I might as well show you this too, because I have had questions on this before. I use this this winch system. So I just take the seat bolt out, I put an eyelet in here. And then up here, you can see that I have a V-Bar electric winch hoisting system. I got this, you can see this comes off. These are the controls, up and down, emergency stop. It also can slide on cables, see? So I can pretty much put it wherever I want, and I also have the system on rails. So you can slide the center rail left or right, and you can, of course, move this either way. So you can pretty much get it wherever you want in the space that you have. This is something I just made out of strut bar, but I figured I'd show it to you because I have had some questions on it. It just makes things a lot easier when you're working on suspension, because you can completely take the weight off the bike and you don't have to try to suspend it from something. The other thing that works that I've done in the past is put an eyelet in the ceiling. I bolted it directly to a joist above. It's a lag eyelet that lags right into the joist or the trusses up above. And I use typical tie-down straps. That works too, but this is way better. It's way easier to work with. So let me put this back on, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in terms of the sag and everything. Just bear with me because I don't really have a way to get this thing down here, at least not easily. So I'm using and I will show you this in a second, I'm using the standard mount, not the lowered mount, because like I was telling you before, if you try to use the lower mount, the problem is that it changes the geometry of the bike even more so than it already is. So it's already a unique geometry for a bike to begin with, and using that lower mount, yes, it does lower the bike, but it also completely changes the geometry of it. And when you're talking about a beginner, it depends on their skill level, I suppose. If you feel that the person is going to be, the beginner that's riding it is going to be at the same skill level for a long period of time, you could get away with it. But I think, if anything, when the bike is like used for serious off-road stuff, I think it's going to severely hinder the person, and they end up not able to learn as quickly because of it. I strongly feel that way, that if you do end up using this bike as your only bike, I just want to make it clear that there is a major downside to trying to use this bike for serious off-roading. See, this makes it so easy to line everything back up without having to fight it. It's really good for that, this hoisting system. Come on. Okay. Also, in regards to the carburetor situation and the bog that I had in the past is definitely better, but it's still there. And I think the reason why, and I think other people might have said this too, is that it's because I really do feel that the Nibby carb, which is a 26 millimeter that I got for the bike, I honestly think it's 2 millimeters too big. I really do. I think it's 2 millimeters too big, and the theory on that is that if I put my hand over the intake, I can get the bog to stop completely. So that tells me the carburetor is probably too big. I tried every jetting combination I can think of. I checked the spark plug to see what type of burn I'm getting out of it, and I just think that the carburetor is probably better if you were to get a 24 millimeter for this bike instead. Alright. There's a couple of other things too I wanted to mention. I did do the replacement of the battery. I'll show you that. The battery's been replaced. Same one Mike Festiva did use to the slimline battery. Put in the blocking you know, to make it as secure as possible, and it's much better than stock. I'm working on a reserve petcock as well. I'm trying to think of the other things that I did. Oh, there's going to be, I'm going to be making the emergency flashing units for these, if you haven't seen it. Ugh. The emergency flashing kits are, well, I use them because I'm on the farm and I do a lot of work on the farm, and it requires that, you know, I have some kind of lighting so they know it's me and not some kid messing around that came off the street. Anyway, I'm going to be making a Navionics version of this particular flashing kit that has built-in isolation. And what I mean by that is that because I'm using the existing lights instead of adding lights to the bike, because there's really no room to add lights on this bike without making it look ridiculous. So because these directionals have to be independent, and the headlight and high beam has to be independent, as well as the tail light, of course, and the brake light. If you were to wire these up just for flashers, then every time you hit the brake light, the headlight, the high beam would come on, because those are wired to flash together. And every time you'd hit the left directional, the right and the left would flash together. Well, obviously that's not any good. So the diode isolation is necessary to keep them isolated. So when the switch is on, the high beam will just simply override that. If I turn the high beam on like that, you'll see that the headlight no longer flashes because the high beam is on instead of flashing. As soon as I shut the high beam off, it'll start flashing again. If I turn on the directionals will still work, but you'll see that, I turned it on this one, you see that it messes up the sequence. But the reality is that they're working just fine when the flashes are on. But more importantly, the real important thing with this is that when you hit the brake, the high beam doesn't come on, and when you turn on one directional, the other directional doesn't come on. It isolates them to that extent. So I am building a specific model that has the built-in isolation, the diode isolation in it already. So you don't have to be concerned. I've had quite a bit of questions as to where you can get them. Well, the truth is you can't get them. They don't make them. Not like they need to be made for these bikes. So I'm going to produce an epoxy-filled, probably an aluminum chassis, and that would make it so that you don't have to worry about corrosion and water damage and blah blah blah. So you'll basically just have the necessary wires that are labeled accordingly, and the installation will be really easy and minimal because it'll have everything built into the unit as a whole. The other thing I'm going to be making, not necessarily for these bikes, but you could use them on these bikes, is when you race enduro or hare scrambles or any kind of woods like GNCC racing and stuff like that, the common practice to get people out of your way that are not in your class, to let them know you're coming up, is to scream at them or to rev your bike to the moon. That does work, but it kind of wears on you when you're on a 3-hour race. So I wanted to come up with something that would be a little bit easier and better, and I think what I'm doing is I'm going to create, now you can use this for more than just racing, of course, but I'm going to produce a special horn system that has a horn pattern that is nothing like a traditional horn. It's not going to just be this. When you push the horn button, you can keep it pressed and it will pulse and do different patterns. I'm not sure if anybody wants to have that, just to have it on their bike to replace the existing horn, but I think it would be really great for people who race. It would be unique, and it wouldn't just be the common, typical horn sound. So I'll be working on that. Special grip warmers. This bike has grip warmers. I'm making a new kit that is a much improved version with insulating bar ends underneath on both sides, kind of like a throttle tube on both sides, because if you don't insulate them properly, the heated grips will end up heating the bar more than they hit the grip. All right. This is my prototype with the switching here, high and low, but I know I can do better, and I would like to have an integrated switching mechanism so that you don't have to have some cheesy add-on for this stuff. It would be better. Oh, the other thing too, probably my most exciting thing, at least in my book, is I'll be making communications for the bikes. A lot of people like to ride trails together with their family or friends, and having an integrated communication system in the helmet would be really helpful. But I really don't want to do it the way they do it now, which is Bluetooth, because Bluetooth has a very, very limited range, and it also has a very limited amount of users that can be on the system at a time. Most of the time it's about 6. I don't want to do that. I'm going to use traditional two-way radio frequencies, license exempt ones, in the VHF band, that you will be able to literally get miles out of it, and the radio will be integrated into the bike. The PTT, I'm figuring it out, but it's going to be on the bar someplace to push the talk button. Speakers are going to be integrated into a kit for the helmet, along with the microphone that clips on the full face, the jaw guard on the full face helmet. It also could be in Vox mode too, which means that it would key up by you simply talking, but I don't think that's probably the best way. I think the PTT button is better. Alright, let's get back to the bike here. When it comes to the bike, I'm going to lower this whole thing, and forgive the crudity of this whole production here, because I just don't want to do a ton of editing, so I'm just trying to minimize the amount of stuff I do here. I just wanted to point this out. I want you to see, when I pick this bike up off of the stand, you can see that it's sagging under its own weight right now. Now, if I put the bike up on its stand completely, so the wheel's off the ground right now, which it is, all right? I just want you to see, when I put this bike back down, it sags under its own weight starting right now. And you see, it doesn't look like a lot, but it's about 35, 40 millimeters right there. That's the sag that's the surplus, or the side effect of getting the proper spring rate for your weight. When you get the proper spring rate for your weight, you set it to the 4 inches or 100 millimeters, 105 millimeters of rider sag, which is when you're on the bike. When you get off the bike, if you have more than the 35 to 40 millimeters of sag, then the spring is too soft. If you have less, then the spring is too stiff. So once you get that in that target area, the bike's behavior completely changes, because it was almost unrideable in a true off-road environment with the stock spring rate and the horrendously slow valving of the stock shock and fork. Once that was altered, like I said, it's probably a good 60% improvement, but there's still room for improvement. The one last thing I wanted to mention about the hard off-road environment like New England single-track woods with, embedded rocks, logs, and roots, is that these tires are not so hot for that type of terrain, but even more importantly, the wheel size definitely makes it more of a challenge, especially for a beginner, to get over this kind of stuff. It doesn't seem to want to traverse over these logs that easily, and because the bike doesn't have that zippy kind of throttle response to get the front wheel over stuff, you suffer even more. And that's why I wanted to point this out to beginners, that you are going to get to a level, if you keep learning and getting better, you're going to get to a level where this bike actually hinders you from progressing more. The only way I can see that that might not happen is if modifications are made and I find that I can improve the bike vastly from what I'm experiencing now. Even though the suspension's better than it was before, it's still, there's probably 100 bikes out there I probably could name that would be better than this in a true off-road, harsh environment. And this bike, like I said, is good as the value is. It is great, but it leaves something on the table to be desired when it comes to helping a new user, a new rider get better. You will get, you will get better as you ride more, but you're going to come to a wall when it comes to harsh off-road conditions. Whereas if you had a bike that was a little bit more compliant in not only the suspension range, but also in the power range, because this thing only has 9 horsepower. And like I said, getting the front wheel over logs and roots is not that easy with this bike. Everything has to be just perfect. Whereas, my KDX or any of the race bikes, no problem at all. You don't even have to clutch the bike. It'll do it in pretty much any gear, within reason. It makes traversing over huge logs no problem. But this is a challenge. So I just wanted to point that out, that new users may find that they run into a wall with this particular bike because of that. Now, I don't think the Templar or the Paladin or the other full-size framed bikes would probably be as severe as this one. I think it's a combination on this one of the horizontal cylinder, which gives you a ton of ground clearance, but there's something strange about the geometry that doesn't allow me to ride this bike like any other bike. And because of that, that's why I'm mentioning this stuff to you. Alright, well, I think for now, that's pretty good. This video is a bit longer than I hoped it would be. But I will focus on this stuff even more as I progress with some of the products that I was telling you that I wanted to produce, because I think a lot of people would appreciate some of the stuff, and I've had a lot of comments and questions about stuff to my private contact information that I think I might just go through with building this stuff and getting the communications working, so you have a communication system. And you can, by the way, the communication system would be so cool because you can share it with you can have everybody in your group have one of these systems on their bike regardless of the bike, and it's like a party line. You could have as many people as you want on the same system, and you're talking about halfway decent range, not 40 feet like Bluetooth. You would probably get a mile in the woods on VHF. The radios will transmit 2 watts of output power, and I'll have to work out some of the details, but I just thought, like, if I go riding casually with a bunch of friends, it'd be really great to be able to talk like that. I think I might offer both a Bluetooth version that bonds to the helmet on the outside, and a real two-way radio system where the radio gets mounted on the bike with a particular case to make sure it's safe, with the PTT button, the built-in speakers in the helmet, along with the mic. I think that would be really great. I might even see if I can mount the radio on the helmet. I got to see how it all works out. But anyway, I guess that's good for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll keep you posted on how progress is being made with all this stuff. If you guys have any questions, just let me know in the comments, okay? Thanks.